too difficult. No. So the poem she's referring to is by Baba Taher. ز دست دیده بود دل هر دو فریاد، هر آنچه دیده بیند دل کند یاد، بسازم خنجری نیشش ز فولاد، زنم بر دیده تا دل گردد آزاد. You know, I sometimes wonder as to how these poems are written. I think it was Betty Davis who had once remarked that old age is not for sissies. You know, it's not something you can say when you're 20 or 30 or 40 or even 50 or 60. You're like in your 70s or 80s, and you really have to be tough-skinned, because Betty Davis used to be very attractive when she was young. And like the rest of us, as we get older, we get uglier. Especially as a woman in a culture such as this, where you're forced really for the most part to live through your body. You know, to walk around and realize that as a woman you're becoming invisible. That you remember your youth, but the facts of your life is that, you know, you're all wrinkled up. It's difficult to walk, difficult to remember things. And so she looks herself in the mirror possibly, and then, you know, she just says, if you're a wimp, if you're gonna whine, if you're gonna cry, if you're gonna scream, you're just not made for this. And so, you know, maybe she was just having a bad day, a moment of insight, where she was just saying, you know, old age is not for sissies. Because I'm sure, you know, she probably did have days where she would sit with her friends and have coffee and have tea and have a good time, talk about the past. And it's just that one moment becomes one of the most insightful things that she had ever said. And it's kind of like this poem by Baba Taher. I don't even know where to start really, because it's when I hear it, it's very devastating and there is no way out of it. You know, you live in a world that it's very difficult to understand. You live amongst people who are very difficult to understand. You have to be in relationships with all sorts of things. And you have all these experiences, some positive, some negative, some neutral where you're just indifferent towards them. But you know, it's like you go to class and then you go home and you want to have some dinner, but the ideas of the class are not leaving you alone, so you just can't eat dinner, you know. or you sit amongst friends and you want to have a conversation, and let's just say you have just read a big, thick book about Buddhism and his ideas about talking. I mean, these are friends you haven't seen for a while, and you want to like just catch up. And you're a person, to some extent, who takes themselves very, very seriously. And then you want to chit chat, and then you remember what the Buddha said, and it just ruins you. And the poem really is just about that. As a dast dide wo dil. Dide means eyes, but really it's not limited to your eyes. It's just about the five senses that impressions are coming your way from all over the place. They enter through your nose, through your eyes, through your ears, through your mouth, through your touch. And they leave a mark, what's his name? Anthony Hopkins, long time ago, played him in a movie, and the movie was called Stain. And all these experiences that you have through the senses, they leave a stain inside you, and if you happen to be very unlucky in life, you come from Iraq, for example, or you come from Ukraine, or if you've seen this action movie, Ray Donovan, I think it's on HBO, where these 3, 4, 5 brothers were going to church at a very young age, but the pastor of this church, kind of robbed them of their innocence. And so from a very young age, you have this traumatic experience. When we were in Rome, my aunt had a friend, his name was Eric. He was a fellow journalist. And the reason as to why Eric, I don't know his last name, he got into journalism, and it's a story my aunt told me, that he was very close to his father, and his father was drafted to go to Vietnam during the war. And I may be mistaken, but it was some horrifying experience that his father had. And when he came back home, Eric assumed that his father hadn't changed, that the war or what he had seen had not changed him that much. So he ran to his father to give him a hug or a kiss, and the father just pushes him away. And I suppose the father had seen so much brutality or viciousness that it left a stain inside him. And, they just grew very, very distant, Eric and his father. And when he got a little older, he decided to go to places that his father had visited to figure out what had happened to his father. And then little by little, Eric begins to, put the pieces together. Why he drank so much, why he was angry all the time. There are things you see that leave a stain inside you and you can't get rid of them. There are things you see that other people have and you want. And there is so much envy inside you, so much jealousy inside you. I went to, after dropping off the kids, went to Safeway. I went to the frozen section where the ice creams are. And they had these huge gallons of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. It was on sale. You know, they're usually like $12 or something. $5. And so I filled the basket with like 50 buckets of ice cream. And then I went a couple more steps down, and I realized that they had Itsit ice creams as well. And the kids really like Itsit. And that too was on sale. So I got 50 boxes of Itsits. I didn't even think about where I'm going to, find the place to store. But it didn't really matter. Then I said, I remember in Roseville there was a place called Ben and Jerry's, and they had this ice cream called Coffee, Buzz, Buzz. I said to myself, maybe, it's on sale as well. So I went there, and lo and behold, there it is. 2 for $4. So I got, 100 buckets of those. And I realized that I had spent, maybe half hour, 40 minutes just looking for ice cream. And it's really so difficult to overcome the desires that live inside you, to overcome the memories that you have inside you, whether the memories are, one of nightmare or they're pleasant, it matters very little. And, one day you just come home and you just want to sit and you want to relax, but, it haunts you. It just doesn't leave you alone. And to some extent it reminds you of the Gospel of Judas, that, ultimately he comes to realize, Jesus does, that in the Gospel of Judas, that as long as you live in the body, your 5 senses, and the memory becomes a 6th sense, they're always active. They kind of just push you around. And Baba Taher comes from the Sufi tradition. It's where you want your physical body to some extent to be disconnected to the world, because you don't really find it very nourishing, very satisfying. The less you have, the better you are. But it just doesn't work that way. So he says, that everything that I experience, it's like my heart or my soul is like a floppy disk. It records everything, and then it brings them to life and pushes them in my face, where I have to see my daily experiences or experiences from 10, 20, 30 years ago. هر آنچه دیده بیند دل کند یاد. That we are bound by them, enslaved by them, imprisoned by them, and there is no way to escape. The desires, the memories, it's impossible. And you don't even have to be in the world just is inside you, and it's always pursuing and chasing you, forcing you to walk instead of fly. بسازم خنجری نیشه ز فولاد. It's such a, I think, awful imagery if you were to translate it word by word, that I want to make a dagger, a knife or a fork, and I want to put that dagger in my eye socket and just pluck out my eyes. Because if I was to be blind, then I wouldn't be able to see anything. And if I don't see anything, I don't desire anything. And if I don't desire anything, I don't pursue anything. And, you're free of so many things. And if you're able to just pluck out your eyes, or, remove yourself from your senses, then you can really, really, really be free. I don't know what good this poem does to those of us, who have a family, who have a job, who have a life. You have to, don't get me wrong, these are great poems, They're inspiring. They kind of give us some insights about the facts of life and the human condition. But there isn't really much you can do except to have come to a place in life, and you can't do it when you're young. You know, it's like being a mother of, 2 kids or 3 kids, and you read this poem and then you say, okay, I'm slowly going to remove myself from physical life. Well, how is that possible? You have kids, they need to go to school, they need to eat, they have friends. You can't lock them up and force them into become a monk, because then they'll become lopsided as they age and move into society. So, all of us here, we have things we need to do, you have classes to teach, you have a house to take care of. Alison just inherited the house. Getting has classes to teach, you have classes to teach, Lula has to work tomorrow. Jackie's traveling in a couple of days. Olinda has to go somewhere, go back home and start doing her PhD. Sarah got kids, I have kids. Stacy works. So all of us are connected. There is no way to escape any of this stuff. And maybe the point of these poems is not for any of us to kind of walk away from life. Maybe it's just a few of us sitting together, wanting something we can't have. Finding moments where even if your senses are active, they can be in relationship to something that perhaps has some depth, is a bit more meaningful. You can sit home and, like me, and watch TV, watch tennis, think about, watching this series on HBO called Succession, I think. I don't know if, is that Succession? It's, 3 or 4 or 5 seasons, and each season has like 900 episodes. And it's really about a father who spent his entire life with $25 and now owning half the world. He's old, he's sick, he's dying, and he's got 3 or 4 kids. And they're vultures, they want to see him dead so they can kind of have parts of this company. You can come home and have your eyes be attracted to the show and then your mind be occupied. Or you can sit home perhaps and have a nice conversation with a group of friends, or you can sit home by yourself and read a book. And I think this particular poem really has to do with Baba Taher feeling a little alienated, that he's in the wrong place, or maybe he just woke up in a sorrowful mood. He feels a bit estranged, and he doesn't really know what to do. He feels homeless. His senses can't really connect him to anything that will calm him down. So he is inspired to write this poem that, I really don't want to be part of this world, and I really don't want to remember any of the things that the world has put inside me. I want complete freedom. Only if I was, when I was very, very young, if somehow I had this disability where I couldn't feel anything, remember anything, see anything, then I could forever be like a, 1-year-old, where you just roam around freely. Your frontal lobe is not fully developed, so you can't really store anything in your memories. You can't remember anything. Your father slaps you and you cry. Next minute he says, let's go ice cream, and you say, fine. It's a great world to be in, but as adults, I'm not really quite sure what you can do except what we talked about in class tonight, which was hope for a painless death where you just disappear. And, if there is an afterlife, if there is a God, if you do have a soul that ultimately goes somewhere, kind of like Plato had argued that maybe in death something about it just frees up. You know, there is this scene at the very end of the movie V for Vendetta. You know, he's like thought of, I don't know, 20 armed men, and he's got, you know, bullets inside him, he's about to die, and he goes to Evie, Natalie Portman, and she says, let's get you to the hospital, let's get you fixed. And he's just tired, you know. He was taken away by force, he was experimented on by force. He comes out completely deformed. And he's had all these horrific experiences, and now he spends most of his life trying to look for justice. You know, he seeks revenge in a very healthy way. He thinks the government is bad, the system is bad, and he wants to free the people. And he falls in love with Evie, Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman falls in love with this masked man, which in itself is quite strange, that you don't see anybody, you know, you don't see his face, and you have never been physically intimate with this man, and yet there is something about him, there is something he stands for that, you know, you just fall in love with that. And, you know, when she says to him, let's go to the doctor, he says, no, please, you know, let me go back to my maker. This place is just too much, it's not worth it anymore. You know, and then you have to kind of sit back and ask yourself, why would a man like Baba Taher, who comes from this tradition, and it's a tradition that, you know, trains you to live in both worlds, not harmoniously all the time, not without difficulties, where, you know, their idol is Muhammad, he's a married man, and yet he's also a political, social reformer. There are those who take his message in a spiritual way. There are those who take his message in a physical, social, political way. And, you know, if he can be married, have children, also be a political, spiritual leader, then everyone who follows in his footsteps must do the same. And so you're talking about Baba Taher around the 12th century, who's very proficient, you know. He's married, he's got kids. He's also a teacher of his own community, and yet there are moments he comes out and says, you know, it's just too much. The world is too much. My body is too much. I keep getting dragged down. I think he was just in a bad mood. You know, I don't know how some people survive who really have had traumatic experiences. You know, I don't remember much about anything really. I mean, sometimes Sarah and I talk, or sometimes, you tell me stories like, remember, William said that some years ago at Sierra, someone asked you a question and then you invited the entire class to your house. I have no memory of that. I think William just made it up. But sometimes I do wonder, someone like me who has had a relatively clean past, I have a good amount of ups and downs. I did so when I was younger. I did so when I got a little older. And now that I'm close to my death, I'm still having ups and downs. But I wonder how it is for someone, who's had some experiences when they were 5 or 6 or 10. And it's a memory they can't escape. They do therapy, it doesn't work. They do drugs, it doesn't work. They distract themselves in 1,001 different ways, and eventually they realize they just won't work. And it's a really, really, really difficult place to be. And I'm not quite sure if he was like sitting and giving a lecture or a sermon about his poem, what he would say to his audience. That what life binds you to itself. It holds you hostage and there isn't much you can do. But it does give you some insights about yourself, that despite your best attempts, life really has a leash around your neck. And inasmuch as you desire to, free yourself and fly, it'll always drag you down because of your five senses, because of the desires, because of the relationship you have with the physical world, because of what you see in the physical world, because of your covetousness. I remember when we were gathering at Hussein's, every time that we were not around him, life was difficult. And our only solace, the only oasis that we had was, when he would call and say, "Why don't you guys come over?" Or Husseinian would call and say, "Let's have a gathering tonight where we can play music." We would have, a modest dinner, and then we would start playing music. And, the poems are quite sad. The music itself was quite sad. Kazem's singing was quite sad. My singing was quite sad. And yet there was, we all shared, in the idea that, the path is quite difficult. Being human is quite difficult. And for those few moments, all of us came together with this understanding. And then by 2 a.m, we were far too exhausted to feel anything, to remember anything. We'd just go home and crash. But you would wake up and you would have a nice memory. Kazem would send a text saying, "Amir, thank you." I would send a text, to Ali saying, "Ali, thank you." And then after, a couple of hours, we would just forget about the whole thing. And the funny thing is now, I don't even remember the last time we had a gathering. It's when I think about how things are now versus how things were 6-7 years ago. I mean, you were there, Cassie. For almost 10 years you would come to the gatherings. You learned how to speak Persian. You learned how to sing. But you also came to these gatherings, and your Saturday nights, for the most part, every other weekend, you knew what was going on. All of us would get together, have some food, talk, laugh, and then play music. And now, there is no gathering. People have gotten old, people have gotten tired. They're exhausted. Nobody really wants to talk or go anywhere. No one wants to play music. Everybody has kind of gotten tired of the repetition, So the relationships are there no more. It's finished. I see Kazem. I saw him maybe a month ago. So yeah, let's get together. Let's do this. Let's do that. And Ali was there too. And no one really is inspired to call anybody to gather with anyone. And then again, you look at yourself now versus 5 years ago, and you feel the poverty that you have now. That, the poverty in energy, the poverty in being inspired to call your friends. I have no desire to see them or play music with them, and yet I miss, to some extent, seeing them, chatting with them. And it's not very philosophical. Because to some extent, at least when it comes to Kazem, both of us know that, we're drowning. We're both getting old. There isn't really much to talk about. Whatever was worth talking about, we talked some 20, 30 years ago. It's no longer necessary. We both understand each other. And yet the memory of having gatherings, sometimes they do hold me hostage. I mean, look at my instruments. They're sitting on the wall. Most of them are broke. I have an amplifier, a speaker, a microphone. I don't even get close to them. I haven't sang for God knows how long. I don't even know if my vocal cords, which at one point used to be great tools, I don't even know how my voice would come out. I have forgotten most of the poems because, if you don't remember, you don't sing them, you eventually forget them. And it's something even my father tells me once in a while. He says, call them, you guys should get together, do music. It was such a nice thing. It's too bad that you guys don't gather anymore. And it is part of memory. It haunts you, and depending on how intensely you were connected to an event or certain rituals, and when you lose them, it's kind of like what Henry David Thoreau said about friendship. That first, they're very, very difficult to find, and they're very, very difficult to make. But once you do create a very, very good and healthy relationship, you're extremely rich. And when you lose the friendship, you're extremely poor, And I don't really think there is any way you can make peace with this. You're young, you're vigorous, you have energy, and then you get older and you don't have very much of it. It's part of your memory and it haunts you. So much so that if you happen to not be seasoned enough, you look at some young person who's just kind of goofing around, and you become very, very, very angry with them and at them because they have something that you no longer do. And you wish that you could once again go back in time, kind of like Osakin. Let me go back in time, be young, so I can use my youth in a healthy way, But that's never going to happen. We ran into my aunt outside for a few minutes yesterday or the day before. They had just come back from Portugal. And both her and her husband Shahram, they looked burdened. We went to Rome together, we went to Florence together, we went to various other cities in Italy together, and then we came back and they went to Portugal. And life in these countries, in these places, are so different. There's a certain, I think, degree of, I'm not quite sure what you can call it, if it's respect, if it's honor, if it's simplicity, if it's innocence. And so my aunt was saying yesterday that they're planning to buy a place or rent a place in Portugal where they can go and stay there, 6 or 7 months out of the year. Well, why would anyone say such a thing? It's because they have lived in America for about 30, 40 years. They have been exposed to some of its flaws, some of its difficulties, how it ruins them, how it assaults them, And they went to Portugal, and they see people just being very, very, very different. They're hospitable, they're kind. Portugal is a beautiful, country, at least where they were. They're poor, but they're proud enough of their poverty to make their cities and their life beautiful. And it's all part of human experience and memories where you compare and contrast and you realize, well, maybe this is not the best place to live, so they move. You know, I buy these plants. I take my shovel, I make a hole in the ground, I plant this tree or shrub. 2 days later, I go downstairs, I look at the shrub and I say, this is the wrong place for it. I grab the shovel, dig it up, put it in a bucket, save it somewhere, and say, okay, where should this go? It's like you're forever discontent. You know, I'm not quite sure what it is that you're chasing. Nobody, I guess, knows.